I arrived at class breathless and late, my hair disheveled and my heart racing. Jake was already there, sitting in the front row, with that intense look that always disarmed me. I felt the weight of his eyes on me as soon as I entered the room. He didn't say a word, but the tension in the air was palpable. It was as if the air was charged with electricity, ready to explode at any moment. My footsteps resounded on the floor as I walked to the table, trying to keep my composure. Still, I couldn't help but squint at him. His green eyes sparkled, and there was a slight smile at the corner of his lips. Why did he have to be so irresistible? "Professor Emily, is everything all right?" he asked, his voice low and soft, but full of an intensity that made my heart soar even more. "Yes, Jake. I just had a busy morning," I replied, trying to sound casual, but knowing that he could sense the lie in my voice. As class began, my thoughts kept returning to that silent question that hung between us. How did we let this happen? How did we allow the fine line between teacher and student to be crossed in such an overwhelming way? Every time our gazes met, it was as if an electric current passed between us. I knew I should stay away, keep things professional, but something stronger was pulling me towards him. An irresistible attraction, a magnet that drew us closer and closer, despite all the risks and the guilt that consumed me. The class went on, but my mind was far away, trapped in that gaze that seemed to strip my soul bare. Jake kept watching me, and I felt that he was as lost as I was. The tension between us was on the verge of exploding, and I knew that at any moment, everything could change. The question kept hammering at the back of my mind. How did we let this happen? The first day of school in New York was a mixture of anxiety and excitement. I had just moved to the city, and everything seemed new and challenging. I entered the classroom with my heart racing, trying to keep my composure as the students settled down. That's when I felt a stare on me. Without having to look up, I knew who it was. Jake. He was sitting in the last row, with an expression that mixed curiosity and something else I couldn't identify. Throughout the class, I could feel that look burning into my skin. It was disconcerting, but at the same time, there was something deeply exciting about it. We didn't exchange a single word that day, but I knew that something had changed. The sensation of being watched by him was intense, almost palpable. I wondered if he felt it too, or if it was just something in my head. The following week, during a break, Jake approached me. He was holding a literature book and asked my opinion of the author. We started chatting casually, but I soon realized that our common interests went beyond the pages of a book. We talked about literature, movies, and music. The conversation flowed so naturally that I was surprised when the bell rang, indicating the end of the break. From that day on, our conversations became frequent. Jake always found a way to approach me, whether it was to discuss something in class or simply to talk about something he knew interested me. The chemistry between us was undeniable. I felt a growing attraction, and from the way he looked at me, I knew it was mutual. Once, during a class in which we were discussing a research project, our gazes met in a way that made my heart soar. I knew I had to be careful, but it was hard to resist. When he accidentally touched my arm, an electric current ran through my body. We both froze for a moment, and I could see the desire in his eyes. In that instant, I knew I was about to cross a dangerous line. The touch was followed by a heavy but meaningful silence. I tried to concentrate on the lesson, but it was impossible to ignore his presence so close. When class was over, he approached me again, and with a shy smile, invited me to discuss the project in the library. I knew I should refuse, but curiosity and attraction were stronger. In the empty library, the tension between us was almost unbearable. Sitting face to face, we discussed the project, but our minds were elsewhere. In a moment of silence, he leaned forward, and before I could react, his lips touched mine. It was a quick kiss, but full of intensity. I pulled away, surprised, and at the same time wanting more. He looked at me, waiting for my reaction. I knew that that kiss had changed everything, and that from then on, it would be impossible to go back. We didn't talk about the kiss immediately, but from that moment on, everything was different. Classes became a minefield of furtive glances and disguised touches. I tried to remain professional, but every encounter with Jake made my self-control crumble a little more. I knew I was playing with fire, but the excitement of being so close to him was irresistible. The research project was what really brought us together. Jake and I were forced to spend more time together. At first, it was just work. I was focused on guiding my group and making sure everything was in order. Jake, on the other hand, showed a genuine interest in research, which made me admire him even more. One day, while we were discussing a complicated passage in a book, he leaned over to pick up a notebook, and suddenly, I felt his arm touch mine. It was an accidental touch, but the electricity that ran through my body was undeniable. My heart raced, and for a moment, I lost the thread of what we were talking about. He apologized, but I could see in his eyes that the touch hadn't been that accidental. "I'm sorry, Emily. I didn't mean to," he said, in that soft voice that was already making me melt. "No problem, Jake. Let's get on with it," I replied, trying to keep my composure. But from that moment on, our every encounter was charged with a tension that I could no longer ignore. It was as if our bodies were clamoring for closeness. The apex happened in the library, on an afternoon when all the other students had already left. We were alone, surrounded by books and a sepulchral silence. We were arguing fervently about a research point when, without warning, Jake approached and kissed me. It was a stolen kiss, unexpected, but one I had been craving for a long time. At first, I tried to resist. "Jake, this can't," I started to say, but he interrupted. "Emily, I can't pretend anymore that I don't feel anything for you," he murmured against my lips. I couldn't fight the desire any longer. I returned the kiss, letting all my barriers fall. That moment in the library was the first of many. I knew I was wrong. I knew I was betraying Michael, but I couldn't stay away. The passion for Jake was overwhelming. It consumed my thoughts and made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt for years. When we finally broke apart, both of us panting, he held my face gently. "Emily, this is more than just attraction. I'm completely in love with you." I was torn between guilt and ecstasy. "I feel it too, Jake. But it's complicated. I'm married." He just nodded, understanding, but no less determined. "I know, but I'm not going to give up on you." From that day on, everything changed. Our meetings for the project became excuses to be together. Every touch, every look, every word exchanged was charged with a desire that seemed impossible to control. And even though I knew the consequences, I let myself be carried away by that overwhelming feeling. The text messages between Jake and me were getting bolder and bolder. At first, they were just innocent exchanges about class, little jokes and comments about books. But over time, the words began to carry a different weight, a desire that couldn't be ignored. "You look beautiful today, Emily," Jake wrote one evening after school. I was already lying next to Michael, my husband, who was fast asleep. As I read the message, I felt a warmth rise through my body. I replied with a discreet smile on my face. "Thank you, Jake. You were good today, too." Our conversations quickly evolved into something more explicit. The words became more intimate, more provocative. I found myself lying awake, waiting anxiously for Jake's next message, desiring him in a way I never imagined possible. I started having erotic dreams about Jake. They were so vivid that I would wake up panting, my heart racing. In each of these dreams, I felt his hands on my body, his lips on mine, the intensity of our desire. It was a mixture of pleasure and guilt, because when I woke up, I saw Michael next to me, sleeping peacefully, oblivious to the whirlwind of emotions that consumed me. The guilt grew every day. Looking at Michael became increasingly difficult. He was a good husband, always attentive and loving, but something inside me changed. Jake awakened a part of me that I didn't even know existed, and that scared me. One night, I lied to Michael. I said I had to stay late correcting papers at college. "Don't worry, love, I won't be long," I said, trying to hide the insecurity in my voice. Michael just smiled and told me not to overload myself. The weight of the lie was suffocating me, but my desire for Jake was stronger. I knew what I was doing was wrong, but I couldn't stop. At college, Jake and I continued to exchange messages. Every word, every sentence brought us closer together. The tension between us was palpable, almost unbearable. I knew I was playing with fire, but I couldn't resist. One night, while Michael was asleep, I received a message from Jake. "I can't stop thinking about you, Emily. I need to see you." My heart raced. I replied quickly. "Me too, Jake. But I don't know if we can keep this up," he insisted. "Let's get together. Just once more, I promise." I knew I was on the edge of a precipice, but the temptation was irresistible. I agreed to meet Jake on campus, late at night, when everyone else would have left. Guilt and excitement mixed inside me, creating an almost intoxicating sensation. When I arrived at the empty classroom, my heart was pounding so hard that it seemed to echo off the walls. Jake was there, waiting for me. At the sight of him, all my control crumbled. I ran up to him and we kissed with an intensity I had never felt before. "Emily," Jake whispered between kisses, "I need you." I knew I was on a path of no return, but at that moment, nothing else mattered. The desire we felt for each other was overwhelming, and we surrendered completely to it. The guilt for betraying Michael was still there, but at that moment, it seemed distant, overshadowed by the pleasure and passion that Jake gave me. Every bold message, every erotic dream, every lie told to Michael had led us to that moment. And as wrong as it was, I couldn't bring myself to regret it. I was sitting at one of the farthest tables in the cafe, watching the entrance while my heart was racing. Every time the door opened, I wondered if it was him. And then he appeared. Jake walked in with a confident air, his eyes immediately meeting mine, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. He came over, sat down in front of me and smiled, that smile that always disarmed me. "Hi, Emily," he said softly. "Hi," I replied, trying to control the trembling in my voice. The tension between us was almost palpable, as if the air around us was charged with electricity. "Are you okay?" he asked, leaning a little closer, his eyes fixed on mine. "Yeah, just a bit nervous," I admitted, fiddling with the cup of coffee in front of me. Jake reached out and touched my hand, a simple gesture that seemed to light a fire inside me. "I'm nervous too," he confessed, "but I can't wait any longer." I knew exactly what he meant, and the truth was that I couldn't wait either. The guilt was still there, a constant shadow in my mind, but the attraction to him was overwhelming, impossible to ignore. "Shall we get out of here?" he suggested, his voice low and full of promise. I nodded, unable to find the words. We got up and left the cafe, walking side by side, almost without speaking. The sexual tension between us was almost unbearable. Every step seemed to bring us closer to the inevitable. We found a hotel nearby, discreet, away from the campus. We entered and Jake went straight to reception, taking the room key. We went upstairs in silence, each of us lost in thought, but the tension between us was almost tangible. When the bedroom door closed behind us, it seemed that the outside world disappeared. Jake approached me, his eyes burning with desire. "Emily, he began, but I interrupted him, pulling him into a searing kiss. Our bodies intertwined with desperate urgency, each touch, each caress, charged with an intensity I had never felt before. I undressed quickly, my fingers trembling, while Jake did the same. When we finally found each other naked, the passion between us exploded. The first night with Jake was a mixture of passion and madness. Our hands explored every inch of each other's bodies, our sighs echoing through the room. He made me feel alive in a way I had never experienced before. Every touch, every kiss, was as if he was etching his name into my skin. "I want you, Emily. Now and always," he whispered in my ear, his voice husky with desire. "Jake," I moaned, unable to form coherent thoughts. "I want you too." Our bodies moved together at a frantic pace, as if we were trying to merge into one. The passion was so great that it felt like we were going to consume each other. When we finally climaxed, it was as if the whole world had stopped, and there was just the two of us in that hotel room. Afterwards, we lay side by side, panting, our bodies still trembling from the intensity of the moment. "I knew it would be like this," Jake said softly, stroking my cheek. I smiled, still stunned by everything we had experienced. "Me too," I replied, feeling a mixture of excitement and guilt. I knew what we were doing was wrong, but that night, passion overcame every other feeling. We spent the night together, sleeping entwined. However, every time I closed my eyes, the image of Michael, my husband, invaded my thoughts. Part of me felt like a traitor, but another part was completely surrendered to the passion that Jake aroused in me. The morning came too quickly. The sun illuminated the room, and reality began to seep in again. I turned to Jake, watching him sleep for a moment. He looked so peaceful, so different from the whirlwind of emotions I was feeling. Slowly, I started to get dressed, trying not to wake him, but Jake opened his eyes and pulled me closer. "Stay a little longer," he murmured, his voice hoarse with sleep. "I can't, Jake," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I have to get home to Michael." He sighed and nodded, his gaze full of understanding, but also sadness. "I understand, but that doesn't mean I'm going to give up on you, Emily." His words hit me like a thunderbolt. I knew he meant it, and that only made everything more complicated. "I have to go," I said, getting up and leaving the room, feeling his gaze follow me to the door. I walked back home, my mind a jumble of emotions. I knew that from that moment on, nothing would ever be the same. The passion I felt for Jake was overwhelming, but the guilt of betraying Michael was just as intense. I entered the house and found Michael still asleep. I looked at him for a moment, feeling a pang of remorse. I lay down next to him, trying to find some kind of solace in the familiarity of our marriage. But when I closed my eyes, all I could see was Jake's face, feel his touch, remember our night together. From that day on, I was torn between two worlds: the comfort of my marriage to Michael and the irresistible passion I felt for Jake. Every secret encounter, every touch, every stolen kiss only made the choice between them even more difficult. I knew that eventually I would have to decide, but at that moment, all I could do was live day by day, trying to balance desire and guilt, passion and reality. The next morning, I woke up with a mixture of remorse and excitement pulsing through my veins. The sun was already rising through the hotel room window, and the soft light illuminated Jake's serene face, still asleep next to me. I got up slowly, trying not to disturb him, and walked to the bathroom. I looked at my reflection in the mirror, the dark circles under my eyes revealing the sleepless and intense night. What had I done? As I washed my face, my thoughts turned to Michael. He was at home, probably preparing breakfast, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. Guilt squeezed my chest with every breath, but along with it, there was an excitement that I couldn't ignore. The memory of Jake's touches, his burning kisses, was still fresh in my mind. It was like a drug I couldn't get rid of. I dressed quickly and left the bathroom. Jake woke up to the sound of the door, his blue eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made me shudder. "Morning," he said with a lazy smile. "Good morning," I replied, trying to keep my composure. I have to go. I have class in a few hours." Jake stood up, still naked, and walked over to me. "Emily, are you okay?" "Yeah, I'm fine," I lied, looking away. "I just need some time to process all this." He held my face between his hands and kissed me softly. "It's okay. I understand. But know that I'm here for you, always." I left the room with a heavy heart, trying to organize my thoughts. I got home and found Michael in the kitchen, making coffee. I smiled forcedly and gave him a kiss on the cheek, feeling the guilt eating away at every fiber of my being. During class, it was a challenge to keep my composure. Jake was there, sitting in the front row, and our gazes constantly crossed. The tension between us was palpable, and I felt my body react to his every move. Fantasies began to invade my mind, making it difficult to concentrate on what I was supposed to be teaching. "Professor Emily, are you all right?" asked one of the students, noticing my distraction. "Yes, of course," I replied quickly. "Sorry, where were we?" The hours dragged by, and every minute seemed like an eternity. When the lesson finally ended, I left the room hurriedly, trying to avoid any eye contact with Jake. But he followed me into my office. "Emily, we need to talk," he said, closing the door behind us. "Jake, this is a terrible idea," I whispered, feeling my heart race. "I know, but I can't stop thinking about you, and I know you feel the same way." "That's crazy," I replied, but my voice failed me, betraying my true feelings. He came closer and took my hand. "Let's fix this. I need you." His touch sent a wave of electricity through my body, and before I could think, we were kissing again, with the same intensity as the night before. The desire was uncontrollable, and the thought of being discovered only added to the excitement. "We need to stop," I said, finally managing to push him away. "This is wrong. Why is it wrong if it makes you feel so alive?" he retorted, his eyes burning with desire. I left the office, leaving Jake behind, and tried to organize my thoughts. The mere mention of this possibility made my heart race. The proposal was tempting, almost irresistible. He suggested somewhere far away, where no one knew us, where we could just be ourselves, without the weight of social impositions. "Emily, what do you say we spend a weekend together? Away from everything and everyone?" he asked, with that smile that always disarmed me. "Jake, it's too risky. What if someone finds out?" I replied, trying to sound more rational than I felt. "Let's be careful. We've done this before and it worked. Trust me," he insisted, taking my hand and entwining his fingers in mine. The idea kept hammering away in my head for days. The urge to give in to temptation was strong, but so was the guilt and fear of being found out. Finally, I decided that I needed a plausible excuse for Michael. I invented a teachers' conference in another city. I told him it was an unmissable opportunity for my career and that I needed to go away for the weekend. "Michael, a conference has come up at the last minute. It's important for my work. I have to go," he said in a firm, rehearsed voice. "A conference? Just like that?" he asked, with a suspicious look on his face. "Why didn't you mention it before? It was really last minute. I only got confirmation last night," I lied, trying to hide my nervousness. Michael accepted the excuse, albeit somewhat reluctantly. When I finally found myself in the car, driving to meet Jake, a mixture of excitement and fear washed over me. We arrived at the hotel, and as soon as we walked through the door of the room, the tension between us was palpable. Jake pulled me close and started kissing my neck, his hands exploring every inch of my body. "I've been waiting for this all day," he whispered, his voice laden with desire. "Me too," I confessed, giving myself completely to the moment. The unbridled passion that exploded between us that night was indescribable. Every touch, every kiss, every sigh was a reminder of how much I was risking, but also how much I was alive. However, between the moments of pure surrender, the fear of being found out didn't leave me. I knew I was playing with fire, but the adrenaline of being there, doing something so forbidden, was intoxicating. The next day, I woke up with my heart racing. Remorse and excitement were still fighting inside me. Jake was next to me, still asleep, and for a moment, I just watched his peaceful face. I wondered how it had come to this, but I couldn't find a satisfactory answer. I got up and started to get dressed, trying to organize my thoughts. "Are you going?" he asked, his voice hoarse with sleep. "Yes, we need to get back before anyone gets suspicious," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. As we drove back, reality began to weigh on me. I knew I was living a lie, and the line between excitement and guilt became increasingly blurred. When I finally got home, Michael was in the living room, reading a book. He looked up and smiled when he saw me. "How was the conference?" he asked with genuine interest. "It was great. I learned a lot of new things," I lied again, feeling the weight of this new lie on my shoulders. The rest of the day was a desperate attempt to act normal, but the truth was that nothing seemed normal anymore. Every glance from Michael, every gesture of affection, was a reminder of how much I was betraying his trust. At the same time, the memories of the weekend with Jake were fresh in my mind, and the adrenaline was still coursing through my veins. That night, as Michael slept next to me, the fear of being found out came back full force. What if he knew? What if Jake wasn't as careful as he'd promised? The adrenaline that was once exhilarating now felt like a poison, eating away at my peace of mind. I knew I had to make a decision, but the truth was that I was torn between two worlds, not knowing which one I really belonged in. Jake was the embodiment of passion and risk, while Michael represented comfort and security. The thought of losing either of them terrified me, and the mere possibility of being found out made my stomach turn. However, adrenaline, desire, and guilt were a powerful combination that was hard to resist. I knew that this story couldn't go on like this forever. Sooner or later, I would have to face the consequences of my choices. Until then, every moment with Jake was a reminder of how much I was willing to risk for a bit of passion, even if it meant losing everything I had built up so far. The return to routine was harder than I imagined. Trying to pretend to be normal, with everything that was going on inside me, seemed impossible. Every morning, while I was having coffee with Michael, my husband, I felt a pang of guilt. His eyes fixed on me, as if searching for answers I wasn't ready to give. And maybe he was looking for them. "Are you all right, Em?" Michael asked one morning, his eyes full of concern. "You seem distant." "I'm just tired, love," I replied, forcing a smile. "These conferences have been exhausting me." He nodded, but the doubt didn't disappear from his gaze. Michael's suspicions were growing, and I increasingly sensed that he knew something wasn't right. I could see it in his gestures, in the way he silently watched me when he thought I wasn't looking. Jake, on the other hand, was getting impatient. Each encounter was more intense, more charged with emotion and despair. He was no longer satisfied with furtive encounters and stolen nights. He wanted more from me. He wanted everything. "Emily, we need to talk," he said, holding my hand tightly as we hid in the library. I can't go on like this, waiting for crumbs of your time. Either you leave, Michael, or we end this. His ultimatum took me by surprise, and a wave of panic washed over me. Jake, it's not that simple, I tried to argue, but he shook his head. I know what we have is real, Emily, but I can't be your secret forever. I need an answer. Indecision consumed me. On the one hand, there was the comfort and stability of my marriage to Michael. He was a good man. He always supported me and was there for me. On the other side, there was Jake, the overwhelming passion that I had never experienced before. But this passion came with a high price, and I didn't know if I was willing to pay it. At home, Michael continued to watch me with that expression of someone who knew something was wrong. "Are you sure everything's all right, Emily?" he asked again one evening, while we were doing the dishes together. "Yes, Michael. I'm just tired," I replied, but my voice was shaking, betraying my true feelings. "I feel that you're distant. If there's anything I can do, please tell me." I wanted to shout that it wasn't his fault, that the problem was inside me, but the words got stuck in my throat. Instead, I gave him a quick kiss on the cheek and went to my room, where I locked myself away to cry in silence. The nights began to drag on, my mind torn between the safe love of Michael and the forbidden passion with Jake. Every message from Jake was a knife in my heart, his tone becoming more and more desperate. "Emily, I need you. I can't go on like this. Please make a decision." I knew I needed to decide, but every choice seemed wrong. Deep down, I knew I was destroying myself and the people around me. But the indecision was tearing me apart, and I felt trapped in an endless cycle of guilt and desire. That night, while Michael slept next to me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling and trying to find a way out of the chaos my life had become. But the answer didn't come. And so, once again, I postponed the decision, letting the weight of the choice crush me a little more each day. I knew I had to break up with Jake. It was the only way to save my marriage to Michael, to try and regain the normality that I felt slipping through my fingers. I found Jake after class, when all the students had left. He was leaning against the wall, arms crossed, with that intense look that always baffled me. "Jake, we need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He uncrossed his arms and took a step towards me. "I already know what you're going to say, Emily," he replied, his voice low and charged with emotion. "You want to finish." I nodded, feeling a lump forming in my throat. "Yes, Jake. I need to save my marriage. I can't go on with this." He shook his head, visibly frustrated. "Emily, you don't understand. I can't imagine my life without you now. I love you." Those words hit me like a punch in the gut. I knew Jake cared about me, but hearing it out loud made it even harder. I struggled to keep my composure. "Jake, I feel very strongly about you too, but this isn't right. I have a husband, a life built with him. I can't just throw it all away." He took a deep breath, trying to calm down. "So that's it? It's over?" I hesitated for a moment, but I knew I couldn't waver. "Yes, it's over." Jake was silent for a few seconds, staring at the floor. When he raised his head, there was a determination in his eyes that I hadn't seen before. "Then give me one last night, Emily. Just one. We'll meet in the classroom tonight. After that, I promise I'll leave you alone." His proposal took me by surprise. "Jake, I don't know if that's a good idea." "Please, Emily," he begged. "Just one last time. I need this. You don't owe me anything, but I'm asking you, please." I knew it was a mistake, but something inside me couldn't say no. Maybe it was the need to wrap things up in a way that made sense, or maybe it was simply the desire to be with him one last time. "Okay, Jake, one last time." He smiled, relieved. Thank you, Emily. I promise you won't regret it. I spent the rest of the day nervously trying to concentrate on my tasks, but the anxiety was almost unbearable. When evening finally came, I made my way to the classroom with my heart pounding in my chest. The classroom was empty and silent when I entered. Jake was already there, and to my surprise, he was half naked, waiting for me. My heart almost stopped when I saw him like that. "Jake, what are you doing?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I wanted tonight to be unforgettable," he said, walking towards me. "You may hate me tomorrow, but tonight, let's make it count." I hesitated, but the attraction between us was too strong to resist. I took a step towards him and felt his hands pull me close. His touch was familiar, and I lost myself in that moment, forgetting everything and everyone. Suddenly, we heard footsteps in the corridor. The sound brought me back to reality, and fear took hold of me. "Jake, someone's coming," I whispered, desperate. He looked at the door, his eyes wide. "Damn it, Emily, hide!" I ran behind one of the tables, trying to control my breathing. The footsteps got closer, and my heart was pounding so loudly that I was sure anyone could hear it. The door to the room opened slowly, and I held my breath. "Professor Jake, are you there?" a female voice asked. It was the college's administrative assistant. Jake, still half naked, tried to act casual. "Yes, I'm here. What happened?" "I was looking for some documents you asked for. I left them on your desk," she said, not noticing the tension in the air. "Thanks, Sandra. I'll pick them up later. Good night," he replied, trying to sound calm. "Good night, Professor," she said, closing the door and walking away. I waited a few more seconds before stepping out from behind the desk. Jake looked at me with a mixture of relief and concern. "That was close," he said, sighing. I was shaking. "Jake, I can't do this. This is insane. We need to stop." He nodded, realizing the gravity of the situation. "You're right, Emily. I just wanted one last time." I dressed quickly, still shaking with adrenaline. "Jake, I have to go." He walked me to the door, holding my hand for a brief moment. "I'm sorry, Emily. I never meant to put you in this situation." I just shook my head, speechless. I left the classroom with a heavy heart and a confused mind. I knew that night would change everything, but I still wasn't sure how to deal with the consequences. The classroom was empty, and the silence was almost deafening when I entered that night. The air was heavy, charged with a tension that I could feel tightening in my chest. I closed the door behind me, trying to control my rapid breathing. I knew I shouldn't be there, but something stronger than reason was pushing me forward. Jake was already there, leaning against the teacher's desk, wearing just a pair of jeans, his chest bare, and his eyes fixed on me. He looked a mixture of expectant and defiant, as if he were testing my limits. "Emily," he said, his voice husky and laden with desire. "I knew you'd come." I swallowed, trying to ignore the wave of heat that his gaze caused in me. I took a few hesitant steps towards him, feeling the cold floor beneath my bare feet. My shoes were at the door, left there in an almost unconscious gesture of vulnerability. "Jake, we shouldn't..." I started to speak, but my voice failed me. The words seemed empty in the face of the reality that was unfolding in front of me. He moved closer, and the distance between us decreased until I could feel the warmth of his body. "Emily, we've spent too long denying this. You know as well as I do that we can't pretend anymore." I wanted to argue. I wanted to say that it was wrong, that I had a husband waiting at home, that we were risking everything. But the words didn't come. Instead, I felt his warm hands touch my face, his fingers tracing invisible lines on my skin. I closed my eyes, giving in to the touch, to the feeling of being alive like never before. the sound of footsteps in the hallway snapped me out of my trance. I opened my eyes suddenly, my heart pounding uncontrollably. "Jake, someone's coming," I whispered, trying to get away from him. He pulled me closer, a quiet smile on his lips. "Calm down, Emily. Nobody knows we're here." But the sound of footsteps grew closer, and each beat seemed to echo in my mind, bringing up the fear of being discovered. "Jake, I can't." I tried to protest, but my voice was drowned out by the sound of the door opening slightly. I held my breath, expecting the worst. But the footsteps stopped, and the door didn't open again. Silence once again dominated the room, but the tension was now almost unbearable. Jake looked me in the eye, his expression serious. "Emily, you need to decide what you want. We can't go on like this." I knew he was right. We couldn't keep hiding, living this lie. But the idea of abandoning everything and everyone, of destroying my marriage, was too frightening. I don't know, Jake." My voice came out weak, full of uncertainty. He sighed, his eyes softening a little. "Emily, I love you, but I can't go on living like this, afraid of being found out every moment." The tears threatened to fall, but I held them back. "I love you too, Jake. But this is all so complicated." He nodded, sadness mixing with desire in his gaze. "Then make a choice, Emily, for both of us." I knew he was giving me an ultimatum, that we couldn't go on like this, but making a choice seemed impossible. I stood there, feeling the weight of expectations and consequences fall on me. "I need time, Jake," I whispered, more to myself than to him. He shook his head, his frustration evident. "Time is something we don't have anymore, Emily." The sound of footsteps came again, this time closer and more real. My heart almost stopped when the door was suddenly opened. A student, probably looking for something forgotten, stood in the doorway, surprised to see us. "Professor Emily? Jake? What are you doing here?" asked the boy, curiosity evident on his face. Jake quickly grabbed a shirt that was lying on the table and put it on, trying to look as casual as possible. "Nothing much, just discussing some class matters," he said, forcing a smile. I tried to smile too, but my face seemed frozen. "Yes, just going over a few points. Do you need anything, Marco?" The boy looked at both of us, clearly suspicious, but shook his head. "No, I just came to get my books." He went inside, took what he needed and left, but not without casting one last curious glance in our direction. When the door closed again, the silence returned, but now it was charged with something deeper, more definitive. "Emily, this can't go on," said Jake, his voice firm. I knew he was right. I knew I had to make a decision, however painful it might be. Jake deserved better than this life of secrets and lies, and so did I. I took a deep breath, trying to find the strength within me. "Jake, I'll sort this out. I promise," I managed to say, even though my voice was shaky. He just nodded, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and despair. We knew that time was running out, and that one way or another, everything would change soon. I left the room that night with a heavy heart, but determined to find a solution. The life I knew was about to change forever, and I could only hope that I had the courage to face what was coming